Wise men once said, design our world so that we may have positive social and environmental side effects. Now, amid climate change and the threat that it brings to the world, we take a look at green solutions that aren't just environmentally friendly, but also contribute to the economy. Now, from urban farming all the way to green buildings, in this episode, we take a closer look at the green economy. Sawubona, Jumbo, welcome. I'm Tumelo Motutwane, and this is #Africa. Well, climate change has inspired different ways of creating environmentally friendly working spaces. And of course, a company that is hitting two birds with one stone is the Green Design Africa. And we're joined by their co-founder, Veri Shaba. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's talk about what exactly you provide to businesses and, through eco-friendly working spaces. What do you do?
So Green Design Africa, we specialize in green engineering. And what that means is that a lot of buildings are designed, but we never really look at the operational costs. So when you're starting with construction, you look at the capital costs, and that's really where you stop. But what we say is let's look further than that. Let's design this building with longevity in mind and with resilience in mind. So we assist our clients to design low energy, low water, low waste buildings that are sustainable and people want to actually come into the space.
And what inspired that vision?
So the biggest inspiration of my vision is, I'm not sure if you've seen this map that talks about climate change vulnerability, but Africa is the least contributor to climate change, but we're the most vulnerable. So that means that we're not designing our buildings to be able to stand when the climate changes. And when I saw that, I thought, what can I do as an engineer to change the way that we're engineering our buildings so that we actually start thinking about the long-term cycle of our buildings? That's essentially what it is.
Right. And when we think of a climate change, how are you contributing to businesses, of course, conducting their businesses there, but also being aware that they're in an eco-friendly or environmentally friendly working space? How does that help their businesses?
So what I've seen is that sustainability is no longer just that additional bottom line item that you put. Sustainability actually has to be integral into a business. So just a quick example, Cape Town, when there was no water,
right,
it actually meant that people could go home. And what happens to productivity? If you actually look at your square meter rate, one's payroll and one's salary is actually much higher than one's energy cost or one's water costs. So that means that we actually need to start designing buildings so that they're productive spaces that people can work in terms of indoor environment quality, but also just in terms of lower operational costs.
Right.
And I think that that's the biggest thing, is that buildings contribute to 12% of the energy consumption in the world. And so it's looking at how do we, and it's a simple thing that we can do to change that, and it's looking at how do we change that.
Is there a growing trend for more green buildings in South Africa?
There is a growing trend for more green buildings, and I think it's actually started to come out of necessity. So there was an economic recession that was happening in South Africa, a technical economic recession. And what we saw is that when there's a recession, that's when people now start thinking about green, because it's actually about economic, social, and environmental sustainability. But if you use less energy, then that means that your electricity bill is less, which means that you have a higher profit margin. And now suddenly more and more requests started coming in to say, how can you make our building more sustainable?
Right. And just before we let you go, Veri, what is the future of the green economy in your opinion, especially in the sector that you occupy, which is construction and building?
I would say that the future of the green economy is twofold. The first is that more companies are starting to ask about sustainability, not only because from a top-down perspective, but also from a bottom-up. So employees in the new workforce is asking, what are you doing about plastics? And what are you doing about making sure that I'm in a greater environment? So we found that that's kind of the trend where people are starting to ask the questions. People are a lot more conscious. It's no longer a vegan thing to be green. It's actually just a logical thing to be green. And so we're seeing that that's happening a lot more. The questions are starting to come. And I'd say the second fold thing that's happening in the green economy is smart technology is starting to be a much major focus. You can't really have smart without green, and you can't really have green without smart. So we're finding that a lot more people are able to sit in one office in Joburg and able to track their, let's say, 50 buildings across their portfolio just by sitting in their office using smart technology. because you can't really manage what you don't measure. And that's the main thing about green and sustainability, is how do you just measure and quantify the savings that you get from sustainability and also the increase in productivity that you get from your workforce.
Well, thank you so much, Veri, for joining us. Such on #Africa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, that's where we leave our conversation, but we just leave you at that. We take a look at more news coming from our beautiful continent of Africa.
South Africa's sex workers are taking on the government over their daily struggles. They say they're constantly facing police harassment, stigma, and violent clients. Despite the criminalization of prostitution under the Sexual Offences Act of 1957, sex workers and NGOs are calling for the decriminalization of sex work. They're also calling for the rights of those who work within the space. The sex workers believe their occupation offers job creation opportunities for those without tertiary qualifications. They also say that criminalization of their work only forces them to work in unpleasant and dangerous spaces.
If government will back us up, and then at least sex workers will be treated equals as any society, because if sex work will be decriminalized, that means that me and you, we're the same person. We chose a different occupation.
19 people have been killed and 25 shops have been razed in a blaze following an explosion in western Uganda. A fuel tanker exploded on a highway between the capital Kampala and the western town of Kasese. It's believed the driver lost control of the truck and rammed into 3 cars before the explosion. Fatal road crashes are common on the streets of Uganda, and this is often due to a lax law enforcement, poorly serviced vehicles, and potholes on the roads. The incident takes place just over a week after another fatal fuel tanker explosion that killed 85 people in neighboring Tanzania. Hundreds of police, backed by the army, were deployed in Zimbabwe's second biggest city, Bulawayo, on Monday. The move was aimed at preventing the main opposition party from launching an anti-government protest in the city. The Movement for Democratic Change has accused President Emmerson Mnangagwa's government of repression and not adequately addressing the country's economic situation. A crackdown by security forces and failed court appeals have so far prevented many of the party's planned protests.
Whether the demonstration succeeds or not, I don't believe it will solve any of our poverty.
I don't know much, but all I know is that we just want things to return to normal so that we can live a better life.
When we return, we talk to the Urban Agriculture Initiatives, Halalisiwe Msimango, about the trend of urban farming, the funding available, as well as some of the challenges which do exist in the industry. But all that and more when we return.